Hey, what if I were a salesperson and every day I walked around with this? It's my default look. I don't know about you. I don't think I'd be selling much of anything. But I could change it. I could make my default look more like this. Suddenly it's peppier, it's happier. Maybe that's too much. But I'd like the ability to not be walking around like this all the time. So today we're going to be talking about the exciting world of defaults. What is a default setting? Who's setting them? What can we do about it? And we're going to use Userscripts like we have in the past to do something exciting, diverse. We're going to be able to change what's coming at you in the default manner and customize it for the sake of what you're trying to accomplish. What is a good example in this world of a default? Well, many a product out there come with a default setting that seems to make the most sense for that product. I can give you a couple examples here. You may have seen salt shakers like these before. At the top, there's a little knob there, which determines whether or not the cover's closed. Now, when you buy these fresh out of the store, unwrap all the plastic that cuts up your fingertips, oftentimes you see that this is set to sealed. Why? It makes a lot of sense, because if you have it at the wrong setting, look, I'm looking at it now, accidentally turned it upside down, all of the salt comes out. So I can actually, if I'm a chef though, and I want to use it all the time, truth be told, if I were a chef, I probably wouldn't be using these things. But I'd be using a salt box. But anyway, what you might want to do is change the setting to be open. What's another reason the sensible default of closed? Maybe you have rodents or insects, and it doesn't make any sense to have this thing open if it's in storage and suddenly bugs are starting to attack your foodstuffs. So that's a good example of default and the interest you might have in overriding it in that product. Another classic example I found, like looking around, was if you're in the shower, you may have a bathtub, and at the bathtub we have a faucet spout, and there could be a latch on top, which is they call the diverter. And when that's in the upright position, instead of the water coming out of the into the tub directly, it's going to be diverted up until it reaches the shower, and then it's going to come down like that. So if only I had one to show you. Well, wait a minute, here's one. Here it is from the fine people at Kohler. I'll shout out to them. So here actually is the bathtub typical spout. And the default setting is very clear for this diverter, which is in the down position. Now, granted, physics is helping this to happen, but once you have some water coming through here and you choose a position, that position is going to be preserved. So in our case, while this is the natural position for this to come in, which is for the water to go down instead of to go up, we might want, if this is us, right, in our bathroom, we may want this to always go by default up to the shower, not down to the tub. So we'd like this setting to go from what it comes with to here. So when it's like this at all times, that becomes our new default. So let's say 95% of the time I'm hopping in the shower and I want it to be a shower. I'd like this to be the default. I don't want it to always be like that. So we'd like to find a way, if we could, to change the setting that comes out of the box to something that would be the new setting out of the box. So if it's not your box, it's kind of hard to do it, right? If it's a piece of software that's not yours, of your creation, not so easy to do. And chances are people are not really at the software company going to change defaults for you. So that's where we come in with this idea of overriding a default, and that's what we're going to be talking about. there are different types of defaults, and I created a handy dandy Google Jamboard to take a look at this. So let's peek at that stuff right now over here. So here we go. We're inside of a beautiful little Google Jamboard, and I've sort of started to list defaults based on different traits of a default. Don't want this to get academic by any means, but it's kind of nice to see an overview and get an idea of how defaults show up in the software that you're using. So look at the first line here. This is assignment time. So the question here is, when did the default actually get set? When did the value get set? So in many cases, you're talking about a value that's set by the software. So in many cases, say, the software has strategically made a decision, a business decision, that the logic is by default, the value will be X and it will not be Y. But in some cases, which you've probably seen, this value is not set in a deliberate manner by the software. Instead, it's coming from the library. So the library behind the scenes is taking this construct and setting a value. Most things have a default value of some sort. Whether or not that aligns with your and your team's needs is another story. So here, when we talk about the value that's set by the library, it could be something that's happening inside of your compiler and your actual specification. It could also have to do with the library. And in that case, for example, we're going to be looking at HTML form elements and looking at their particular defaults. But over here at the bottom, I'll just start with a couple of them that you see in a statically typed language. Check it out. We've got Booleans. We've got integers. So we've got a whole bunch of other things like this. And these types of primitives actually hold a default value. You may get a warning in your compiler or in your IDE if there is not one set, but maybe you won't. I'm going to show you an example right now. Let's take a look at this little sample bit of code I wrote here in Java. Pretty easy to look at. We're just inside of a class. We've got Booleans, we've got floats, we've got ints. These are all types of numbers, and we also have here a character and a string. So if I go ahead and print these out, we're going to see that, as it turns out, these all have a default value. Whether or not the people who create the software have overridden these with a specific value is still up for grabs. So as you can see here, we haven't set any values. We can go ahead and run this guy here, and at the bottom, you'll see what these defaults values turn out to be. And it turns out that we've got a Boolean defaults to false, right? Here, the Boolean values default to false. We've got floats and ints defaulting to a value of 0. And we've got a character defaults to a Unicode symbol, which is just all zeros across the board. And the string itself turns out it's not initialized at all. It's got a default value of null there. So what we want to, in some cases, do is distinguish between, who's responsible for the default behavior. Is it a business decision by the software you're making, or did it just come that way out of the box and nobody seemed to care? So that's the second row here. After assignment time, when is this assignment happening? And is it happening at the software level when it's being served up to you? Is it happening at the library way before the software was written? So the second facet here of the default is the intentionality behind it, meaning, was this the intention of the software or wasn't it? There's always some intentionality there, but we could argue that if it's an unintended default, is it unintended by the software makers, or maybe it's by the library and AP, or rather the creators of the specification for whatever language they're using. We can take a look, for example, and confirm that in the case of a spec, that is very much intended. Here is the specification for primitives that we find here. Well, actually, this is a tutorial based off of the specification that you get from Oracle, and they'll go ahead and tell you here without looking at the extreme details of the Java language specification what these default values are supposed to be, and these sort of line up exactly with what we were seeing, that the ints and the longs default to 0 and the Boolean defaults to false here. So that's what we were kind of seeing before when we were looking at the code over here that was run for the language. So when it comes down to it, we really want to know whose intention this was and what do we want to do about it. So we could kind of empathize more with the software makers, because if they had a default, maybe it was for a darn good reason. And so we should act a little bit more cautiously before we override. But it's not always the case. Sometimes it just happens to be, what came with it. You bought the car, it came with the mats inside. Maybe the dealer who sold it to me really didn't want me to have those nice mats, but it just came from the factory that way. So, and the third thing we're going to talk about here in terms of a facet of the default is the user configurability. So, either that default that we're seeing is configurable somehow through a setting, right? You might have a list of settings somewhere, or maybe not. Maybe this is not user configurable. I'll try to show you something with configuration. Let me see if I can open up for this particular bit of software I'm going to show you, which we've used in a bunch of our exercises. Okay, yeah, this will work. So here we are inside of electronic medical record software. I can go to settings, which everybody knows is that gear symbol. That's what that means. And then I could go down to user preferences, right? And go in there. And here we are with a bunch of checkbox, too many checkboxes. But these are all settings, right, that have been provided to you by the software for the sake of you to do an override. So we can decide whether or not, for example, to autocomplete fields of some sort. We can decide whether your default view is a graph or a table. We can decide to display some types of warnings or not. What's my default layout? So they do provide you with a way to kind of get around the defaults in some cases. But what do you do when it's just the opposite, where instead of that, we're dealing with those defaults not being user configurable, and it's something you just want to change? The example we gave before is, let's say I did indeed want my bath spout to always start in the upright position and the water always to go over to the shower rather than down into the tub. So user scripts can be used to get around defaults that come inside of the shrink wrap third-party software. We're going to do that today and show several examples of JavaScript that we're weaving into this existing bit of software to override for good justified reasons the default behavior that comes with this software out of the box. So what we're going to do here with the user script, which is going to be seen here with this handy dandy arrow, is we're going to take defaults that were not user configurable, and the user script is going to do this. It's going to change it around and make it very user configurable. It's not going to be in the menu system, although you could probably implement something like that. And you usually want to externalize these types of settings. In this case, we're going to look at examples directly in the JavaScript code where we're going to do sensible overrides of the default behavior. So let me give you a first example now. We're going to start with something very simple, and like I mentioned earlier, we're going to do this a lot of the times through looking at the behavior of HTML elements as a very easy way to look at this whole notion of defaults out of the box. In our first example, we're going to look at checkboxes. So everyone's probably seen a checkbox. You've probably seen it in a form. I'm going to show you one right now. And in this case, we're going to be looking at checkboxes before, not after we've added the user script. So we're going to take a look at what these things tend to look like. All right, hold on a second. Here we are. So here's our schedule. We want to do a printout of the schedule, and you could see this is a great page to show off this example of form elements and defaults. We've got way too many of them. These are all form elements here. This is a form element, right? These are form elements. So this is what they call select, and this is what they call checkboxes. I mean, you know what that is. What you see here is what you get out of the box, which is that one checkbox for schedule summary for this piece of software comes checked. And these other ones are all unchecked. So in our case, the business logic we want is when you first load this particular view, which is the schedule for the day, we'd like other things to be checked. So we may want the notes for the appointment to be checked. And we may want to hide slots that are not occupied by anything. We don't want to see those. So this kind of change can be accomplished with the user script. And so I'll try to show you a bit of code over here of what this might look like. So here we are. We're going to clean the schedule printout, right? I don't know if you can see this well. And what we're going to do down here is we're going to find those particular checkboxes that matter and do something special to them. So I want to make sure that I'm on this appointments form before I bother doing anything in JavaScript. I don't want to do the intensive work of trying to navigate through the page if we're not on the right page to begin with. But I'm going to find these 4 different form elements, and I'm going to do something with them. So if it's an appointment note, I want to see it. If this is an empty one, I want to collapse them. I don't want to see empties. I don't want to show the cancels. And last thing I want to do is actually, this is going to affect the select, but I want to make sure that I'm looking at the whole day's work. And this is going to hopefully speed up everything and on a day-to-day basis for this type of processing. So over here, we're going to take a look now at instead the same exact schedule, but when we load it and the user script's already running here. So let's take a look at that. Here we are in the schedule. All right, and we're going to go ahead and open up the schedule. We don't want to see AM, PM. We want to look at everything. And you can see at the top here, the banner has changed from a red color to this black color. And the 1 indicates that we've got a user script active and running. And we're going to load the same page for the same date of service. And here's what happens. So now you see that we've got appointment notes showing by default. We're hiding the free slots, right? And this is now giving us exactly what we want for a printout. This is a really easy example of overriding a default to do what's sensible for you in the case of the radio button. You'll also notice in the top left-hand corner of this form, we've got the option here to so when we click on either of these, we're going to automatically go to show all instead of the AM PM. And you may recall back here in the other view, we had this. We had clicking on either of these, it goes to PM or goes to AM. So if we're talking about checkboxes, there is a default behavior that comes out of the box, so to speak. And that default behavior is to be unchecked. So the way you would actually get around it in HTML land would be to, I'll show it to you here. You'll see this is the default behavior. Here we have the HTML code for a series of 2 checkboxes, and neither of them are checked. But if we did want one of them to be checked, we can go ahead and add this checked attribute, and suddenly it shows up there. Similarly for horns, we could have had it here instead, and it will show up checked. Or we could have both of them, because this is a perhaps a mini relationship where we're allowed to have multiple ones, both checked. So if we go back to our original example page and take a peek at the what we see there under the covers, we're going to see here. This is inside of Chrome, so I'm going to inspect the code slightly. I mean, I don't want to get too much down into the weeds. But you can see here that out of the box, that's exactly what's happening. So the software on its own is coming with that checked, but all of these other elements here are coming with values that some of which we don't want. So we've actually changed that by adding those attributes or removing those attributes from the actual HTML, and you saw that inside of the code that we showed. The next example we're going to look at is going to involve, they're going to get a little bit more sophisticated, and this is again impacting the business, and hopefully the change we're making is going to be a helpful change of an override of a default. So in this case, we're going to look at 2 quick examples. They both have to do with orders. So when you create an order in the medical records software, it comes with certain checkboxes that are going to impact what happens with that order when you issue it out to the world. So let's go ahead and take a peek at that right now. Here we are inside of, again, the software that does not have the Userscript running. And all we're going to do is we're going to go up here and say, I want to create an order. And this order is going to, if it's an order, say, for a referral to another physician, then this order is going to go to the physicians, be sent electronically. Sadly, in many cases, they're still on fax machines, so this may show up as a fax issue getting issued that way. Or if this is a order for a particular prescription, we're going to send this electronically through an electronic script form. So we're going to create one of each of them, and I'm going to show you what the behavior is. So, and then tell you why this needed to be changed. Let's go ahead and let's say I needed some levothyroxine for this patient Tina test. And when I open up the prescription here that I've just typed in, I see that there is a documentation only box. So this box here, if selected, signifies that even though you can send this potentially electronically, we don't want the software to do that now. All we want is to document in our record that this patient Tina test got the prescription for the levothyroxine. So the default behavior is for this to be unchecked. But the problem was, for a while, the practice was getting billed at a rate that was sort of not fair to it. So in much of the time at that stage, the physician was doing the majority of the orders through a piece of paper that would be handed to the patient. So when this is the default case, we would like this here to be checked as default value. So if we're to go back and take a look at this for the same user for Tina test, we're going to take a peek at it here. We're going to create the same order of the levothyroxine, but hopefully we'll see a different value when we add it for the first time into the patient's order set here. Go ahead and let's add it. There we go. And open it up. So you can see here two changes that occurred. We're sort of highlighting here, which was an easy piece of CSS, to let the staff members know that this will not be sent to the recipient. And you can see here the default value is showing up now for this as documentation only checkbox is checked. So the user script is doing something very similar. Here we are looking at the documentation only checkbox, and what we want to do is if the order is indeed for a prescription, we want to make sure and set this value to true. And conversely, if it's not a prescription, it's okay that it's false. In fact, we're going to look right now at the other type. Oops, excuse me. We're going to look at the other type of order, which is going to be sending a referral out to a physician, collaborator, and I will tell you the nightmare story that happened there. The story goes as follows. We sent a particular doctor an order, and when you send an order which is a referral, you have the option of documentation only, like you see in the prior example, but you also have this opportunity to send all of the summary of care for this patient into the correspondence, which I mentioned before in many cases is a fax. Well, no surprise when summaries of care turn out to be a dozen pages. This particular physician was not a happy camper and actually called and very vociferously complained about it. So at the time, the practice decided we don't want this default that comes with the software. We want that to change. So I will show that to you right now. I'm going to select a true referral, okay? Referral, I'm going to gastroenterologist just for fun. And I'm going to go ahead and select here. And you'll see that if this is a true referral order, the default is indeed to include the summary of care record. But if you don't believe me that this is really frustrating to many a doctor, all you need to do is go sometimes to the forums that are inside of software, which I can go here and check this out. Summary of care defaults. I would like to set an option to set it for, for whatever. This is annoying. So please give us this option to make the default setting to not send a summary of care. Our PT department is tired of getting 30 to 40 page faxes when we forgot to uncheck the box. Many people here, there's like one line for every person who had a problem here and wanted to chime in and say, yeah, I don't want it either. Look at this. Providers' offices are receiving over 100 pages of records. Not a sensible default, people. So needless to say, this is what we implemented. And so I will show that to you here we're going to go back to the version with the user script. And we're going to hopefully get rid of this default checkbox setting that no one yet at the software company has decided. Why wait for somebody who's not waiting around for you? And this is open for quite a while, these ideas, and still waiting. So just you can do it yourself with the user script. There we go. Just add this here. And now you could see that the user script here has gone ahead and said, don't include the summary of care record. Again, some CSS styling just to let you know extra careful that this is a sensitive field. So this now defaults to an unchecked setting, and now our gastroenterologist is a happy camper, not getting all of these pages of the summary of care. Now, mind you, what is it? The road to ruin is baked with good intentions, or paved with good intentions, something like that. There was good intentions behind this. There is a quality measure that CMS and Medicare has, which is that we want our specialists to receive what the primary care physician knows. And that summary of care, when you're creating an order for a specialist, should come alongside. So that's why they kind of chose this default, but it turned out to not be so sensible. Let's go ahead now, and we're going to take a look at another example, which is going to be using another type of form element, the radio button. So you've probably seen radio buttons before. They are, instead of allowing you to select many of them, like I could select both documentation only and include summary of care, or just one and the other. But what if you you only want to be able to select one of them? So that's exactly what the radio button gives you. Here's an example of a radio button here. You can select Huey, Dewey, or Louie, and you can only select one of them, right? So if I go to here, I'll only get Dewey. So you'll notice that there are defaults here, which is, only one of these can be checked. And if you don't have this keyword here of checked inside of the input, that is the one you want, the default behavior is nothing is selected, right? So in many a case, this is fine. So we'll look at an example of a form, which is the new patient registration form. And we're going to look at two fields when you're setting up a new patient. And we're going to see what the default behavior is with the software. And then we're going to see what it actually looks like after we've made a change that made more sense for this particular practice. New patient registration form, which I got from here, just go down to new patient registration, and here it is. So we've got several fields here, and you'll notice that there are radio buttons here. This one here is one that has a default value, and this one does not have a default value, and neither do these over here. So if we go ahead and inspect this particular element, we can see that, much like we looked at before, we've got a radio button here, and behind the scenes, that input is checked. But these other ones are not. So the other ones have to do with consent to text and consent to call. And when we're looking at the software, its defaults do seem sensible, which is to say, I'll let you figure that out with the patient. And this will be basically an opt-in process. The problem is, surprise, surprise, a lot of the times, if you don't have the particular patient's profile set up so that the automated system, which handles appointments, bills, results that have come in, if you don't have those enabled, the patient will never get these important pieces of information. So we want to change it from the policy, which is the policy that comes out of the box but is not configurable, of opt in. We want to change that instead to opt out, meaning instead of these blank values, which we don't want, or perhaps no's, we want to start with, if you want to say you don't have my consent, you need to tell us that explicitly. You can do that here through new patient registration, or else the portal also avails the patient to go ahead and opt out. So let's go ahead and take a peek at what this code looks like. We've got the consent to text, and we've got the consent to call. And as long as we're on that new patient registration page, let's look for these particular fields, and let's look at the these form elements, and assign a value of true for their checked. And there's this other one here, which is going to involve a other type of form element. But let's see what this looks like in action. if we go ahead and open up the new patient registration, if we go here and go to new patient registration, and here we are again with the Userscript at work, we can see from the black banner and the red counter here of 3 active versions of the Userscript running. If we go to new patient reg, now we get different behavior. So now we get what we were looking for, that the consent to text and consent to call default into a yes position, and we've changed the policy through the Userscript into an opt-out policy. So now, by default, if nothing else happens, a patient assuredly will be getting the text messages and the phone calls that they need in order for them to be up to date on their healthcare. They can still change it, but the policy's changed to opt out. And so that's done through overriding the default and making a one that's more sensible to you and not to necessarily what the business behind the software thought would benefit the maximum number of people. So that was quite an easy change. We've got another field here, and I'm going to show that to you on the version without the Userscript, which is right up here, is this usual provider. So I can understand where you don't want to choose this when you're dealing with a practice that involves multiple providers. But in the case here, we're dealing with a single practitioner office. So we have an S Corp, we have a single provider, the physician, the internist. So this sensible default isn't so sensible that we'd have to choose from a drop-down between these types of other providers we have listed when we know it should just be the physician himself. So we're going to do the same thing inside of our code, which is here we are, and we're going to look for that field, which is the primary provider, and we're going to put this provider's ID in as the value for that particular select. We'll go to patient, new patient registration, and now look, this is automatically selected for you. So that has become the new sensible default, and it's been implemented, and it's now overriding the behavior. This brings up another type of form element, which is the select. So if we take a peek back at our version without the Userscript, and we inspect what's happening here, we find that we've got a select, and there is nothing selected here amongst the options. None of these values are set, and when that happens, the default behavior is what we kind of showed but didn't quite go over inside of our chart, of our graph, which is here, that a select defaults to the first option. And we can see that here as well, inside of this playground we've got for an actual select. So we have here, if I look at it with you, this is the default behavior. We have no notion of anything selected, so the default one to display is the first option out of this entire bunch of selects. And if you wanted to say choose hamster instead, you would have to, inside of your code for that option, you'd have to add the attribute selected, and then this happens. So that is exactly what's happening in this other case, where we've had to make a selection, and once we've done so, the full patient registration now has 3 nice new defaults set up. 2 have to do with texting and calling, which is definitely send it, don't wait, let the patient opt out. And the second one is we've only got one provider here, so no need to have the person who's filling out the new patient registration search for it and accidentally configure it wrong, which can lead to complications depending on what the actual web app's business logic does with that value. But always set it, please, to the one doctor that works there at the clinic. So that's what we've done there. So I think that there are these ways that we can take a look at behavior that comes inside of the software, see if it makes absolute sense to us, and if it doesn't, we may want to do something about it. We, in this case, we've decided that in these instances, we wanted to go ahead and override it, and that's what we did here. I'm going to look at another example here involving, besides the new patient registration select, and that's going to be to select the, in this case, instead of the usual provider, very similarly, we're going to select now the rendering provider. So if as soon as you have a patient who's got an appointment and they show up and start the check-in process, there is a default behavior here. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Here we are inside of our schedule, and we have a patient here coming in at 9:20. Let's go ahead and select their appointment. And look what happens here. Very similarly, we're seeing that there's nothing selected here as the provider. And all that we would like to do is go ahead and override this. So in a very similar manner, that is what we can accomplish in just a few lines of JavaScript we're incorporating into this Userscript. So it looks very similar actually to stuff you've seen before. So we've got this, set and save the rendering provider. So this is going to do something a little bit more sophisticated. If we are indeed, if we do find the rendering provider dropdown present, we're going to make sure that there's no rendering selected. As it turns out, you only want to do these types of overrides, assuming that the person who works and uses the software hasn't already set one for you. For example, if the person checking in the patient decided that in that case, we want the laboratory to be the provider for it. We don't want it to be the physician. The last thing that you want is for the Userscript to go against this intention. So we're checking here to make sure that the rendering hasn't yet been selected, and only if it hasn't been selected already, we're going to override it with the same physician's provider ID, and then we're just going to save it with a quick save. So that's what the code is doing here. You can see here. Only if there's no rendering selected are we going to set the value, and then we're going to save it off. So let's go ahead and check that out over on our version that contains the Userscript, which is right over here. So here we are, same patient, but what we're going to do is upon displaying this field, if it's not set, we're going to set it, and then we're going to save it, and this is all going to happen behind the scenes in the Userscript. So it's going to happen too fast for you to see, but you'll see what the end result is. So I'll go ahead and click on it here. Click on this lab visit. It's loading it, it's setting it, and it's saving it off. So now the rendering provider here is exactly like we want. There's no need for the person even to hit the save button the first time. Maybe they're just going to go to it and go away. But for the sake of the patient's record of this encounter, and for the sake of the the billing of this particular appointment, we want to make sure it's well understood that the rendering provider is the physician. And that's what the script is doing here inside of a select. So the last example we have is very similar to this, but it is going to be helpful in a profound way, even more so than the ones that were shown before here. Let's go ahead and look at our version of the software that does not have the user script, and we'll check that out here. Here we have a patient who you've become very, very familiar with, Tina Test, and we go down to Tina's policies for insurance, and inside of the policies, there are a couple of fields that are optionally set. Well, as it turns out, these fields matter a heck of a lot. And if I'm just setting up a policy for the first time, I may not be setting these. I don't want to have to remember to set these in order. And what's the benefit of them? Well, we're going to set the primary care physician, and we're going to also set the, I believe, the referring provider. Referring provider for sure goes up on claim forms to the insurance. And what you will find very, very quickly, if you accidentally leave out the referring provider, you'll get certain payers, certain insurances with eccentric rules will decide we're going to deny this this claim for reimbursement because you forgot to list the referring provider. This could happen, for example, if you have an order that is not just a plain visit, you performed a add-on procedure there, despite the fact that it's happening at your facility with the same provider ordering it on his behalf. They will deny that. So if we open up this particular insurance for this patient, which will be tied to every one of the encounters and to the actual procedures added into that encounter, we see that the referring provider is not set and the primary care provider is not set. So what does this mean that a person working, creating the policy at the office for this patient has to go through? Well, it's downright tedium and it's prone to errors, which is we don't have a sensible default here. We want one. We need to set a default. So in this case, look at all the steps that the person is going to have to do. They're going to have to come in. Remember to fill out, everything involving the insurance, from the ID number to their making sure their address is matching, making sure that this insurance matches, the mailing address matches so that it gets to the right place, make sure that it verifies, but they're going to have to also remember to set the referring provider here. So let's go ahead and set the referring provider to the value that we need it to be. And not so easy. We have to come down here and type the obvious. We have to look for our own physician because this isn't built out of the box. We have to select the physician as the referring provider. And then we have to do yet again the same thing one more time for the sake of who is going to be the primary care physician for this particular patient. Like I said before, you're dealing with a single physician practice. So it's going to be just the one that's there. You don't need to have your staff go through this for every new patient or every new patient policy that comes down the pike. So last move here, without the user script, I have to select this, and then I have to update the policy. If I click away, this is not going to stay either, so I have to always remember to update the policy. All right. We will skip that aspect, but let's go ahead now and take a peek at what this would look like if we implement it in the form of a user script, which we have. For the sake of time here, we won't be showing you the code, but I hope to work that code into a special additional quick presentation on creating a new feature with the user script. So let's go ahead back to our version of this with the user script running. Here we are. We're back here inside, and we're going to scroll down and take a look at this patient's policies and open them up. So you saw before that when we clicked on this update this policy link, that the patient, sure enough, didn't have these set. But we want to make sure whenever this is looked at that we're automatically setting these values for the patient. And it turns out that this is going to happen also when you're creating a policy for the first time. So I'm going to go ahead and hit update this policy. And you can see that they populate here nicely, and we go ahead and hit update policy. Conversely, I'm going to cancel this, and I'll just show it to you if I'm going to create a new policy for them. We're going to create for, let's say this person has Blue Cross Blue Shield of Florida, and we're going to create it for the first time. Normally this is going to show up blank, but in this case, with the user script running, if as long as we've gone ahead and selected this particular insurance, we are going to automatically, for free, thanks to these new sensible defaults, we're going to see that the primary care physician and the referring provider get set to the single value that makes sense as a default. So I'm going to select it. And surprise, surprise, here we are. We get the referring provider and primary care provider set to the correct value. And then all we would need to do is add the policy, and we're off and running. And we can go ahead and confirm by opening it up that sure enough this took place. So let's go ahead and open the policy. And we see here that when we do, these values have been nicely saved, and this is not the case without the default that we needed to add and to make lives easier. No sense going with a default that doesn't match what you have to do. I'll leave on this note. You probably have sensible defaults all over your home right now of things that work. I'm going to show you one just for fun on the way out that resembles a radio button. You remember the salt shaker and the knob that's on the bottom of the spout for the bathtub. Well, you remember the radio button we looked at before for, say, consent to text, consent to call. Let's take a look at something in our life that would probably wake us all up right now, which is a coffee maker. Let's plug them in, and let's take a look at sensible defaults. So I got my Mr. Coffee here. Here we are. Goodness gracious, why is he bringing these ridiculous props? We have our Mr. Coffee, right? And what's the sensible, annoying default that everyone sees with the time? You know what that is. I'll go over that in a second. But here we have what appear to be radio buttons for brewing right now, brew it right now, delay the brew, and clean. What would the sensible default be here? We want it to just brew now, right? So that's the default. What about down here? Here's another couple of options. Only one can be available at the same time. We want a strong brew or a regular brew. So if I go to turn this guy on, you'll see over here, it's flickering, but that's because we're just working on a different frequency than inside of here with the light bulb than we are with the recording. But the default option is to brew now. And only one of them is set. If we go ahead and hit it again, only then would we get a different option. So those, and it feels like this is going to start brewing coffee right on top of my computer. We don't want that. It does sound like it's brewing. Isn't that fun? But here are the other options. You can see the other option here is to delay brew. So I can go to that, or I can actually clean it if it's relevant. And here we are with the setting for the default brewing, which is regular out of the box, and it sounds like water's going to come in and destroy my computer. And we'll go ahead to this other option, which is strong. So the default is regular and to brew now, but if we wanted to, and this was a computer software program, you could probably change this around to always do a delay brew, or heck, I enjoy Cuban coffee. I don't like any of this nonsense of, these mild cups of coffee that don't keep me up all night. I want a strong coffee. So brew it strong for me, will you? Anyway, guys, I really, really hope you got something out of this presentation. I wanted to do my best to show you where it makes sense in your life to basically create something that's more sensible for you than what comes out of the box, and where you can find defaults all over your life. They're in your house, they're in your bathtub, they're in your kitchen. They're coming to get you. Your television has defaults. Turn it on. Where does it go? Does it go to the last channel you were on? Does it always go to channel 2? Does it go to a menu of options for digital streaming first? Those are options out there that are defaults that are set somewhere. In our case, we were looking at 5 different places and different form elements that we could attack with the Userscript to override a default to make it more sensible. Hopefully, it's going to save some time. In the case of the ones for adding orders, the summary of care default was sending 30 to 50 pages to a receiving a doctor who's got a referral from you, and that's no bueno. So we kind of tackled that one. And in another case, we didn't want to see certain fields printed out on a schedule. And in another one, we wanted to change our communication policy from an opt-in one to an opt-out one. And in another powerful example, we wanted to make sure that the correct provider was showing up on every one of these claims sent for reimbursement. And what makes sense in terms of sensible defaults is that when you have a single physician practice, it doesn't make much sense to not have a default of that single practitioner showing up in that dropdown. And that's what we did there in 2 different places. Anyway, consider writing a user script for yourself and doing it to get around something that just doesn't jibe with you. And do me a favor, don't be like those dozens of people on that message board forum who are calling and crying and texting posts, putting posts there complaining about a feature that you please should change. Please stop hurting our practice. Please stop alienating our third-party facilities we're sending orders to. We want a new default. And if you can't do it through your actual software, through settings to override, and you can't do it through waiting around months to years, in this case, for a particular default to change from on to off, then do everyone a favor. Everyone who consumes your implementation of your software, everyone who receives output from your software, and go ahead and set your own defaults through a user script. That's it for today, folks. I really hope you had a little bit of fun, and we look forward to, in another much more brief episode, digging down into the nitty-gritty for how we were able to implement one of these changes of a default setting. So that's it for today, everybody. Take care. Oh, yeah. Before I go, this default color is not so special. I think I'll change it. Yeah. I was blending in too much. Anyway, guys, go ahead, do yourself a favor. Override some defaults with the user script. That's it for today. Take care, everybody. Bye. Oh, yeah.